Franco nearly parked it in the wall. Mercedes topped the timesheets, and every team is pointing at each other like Spider-Man. On the eve of week 2 of Bahrain testing, let's look at the biggest storylines that week 1 produced and what to look forward to this week. What we actually learned, who looks quick, who looks worried, and why the mood around these regulations is already tense. Let's start right away with everyone's calling everyone else fastest. No one wants to be in first right now. Mercedes, they're sandbagging according to their rivals. Red Bull, they're 4th fastest according to themselves, as is McLaren. Ferrari are generally pretty quiet on this topic. They seem to just be going about their business. Let's look at the timing sheets to see what that will tell us. Now, obviously, again, all of the caveats about testing times. We don't know fuel loads. We don't know engine modes, etc., etc. But we do know Mercedes went quickest this week. Ferrari was about half a second down overall. McLaren was nearly a second back, and Red Bull was over a second down as well. And this was pretty consistent throughout the day on day 3 for Mercedes. They did a few long runs. They looked generally pretty good. Car looked planted. Yes, the mileage wasn't massive. They were down overall as a team. But they leave week 1 feeling good, I would say, but not quite the benchmark that they were coming out of Barcelona. That leads me to who I feel was the benchmark of Bahrain week 1, and that's Red Bull. I would bet all of this talk about them being P4 that they're talking about internally is all expectation management. Like I said, Barcelona, engine reliability generally surprised rivals. That Red Bull powertrains package looked solid, but Bahrain produced performance. That has now shifted that to concern for their rivals. They were middle of the pack in mileage, and they didn't have headline pace necessarily, but again, this Red Bull engine is currently punching above expectation. The sentiment around the paddock is still high on Red Bull as a whole. Even though the team wants to dismiss themselves right now, don't let Max Verstappen get a dominant car, because we know how that story goes. Ferrari, quietly competent this week. They had a very low drama, no noise week. Lewis Hamilton's day 3 long run was extremely competitive, not dominant, but stable. They also look the most comfortable with the start procedure, and this is going to be a topic of conversation later in the video as well. But they look comfortable with the start procedure so far compared to other teams. They won't file a formal protest on the current engine conversation with Mercedes. That came out this week, but they do want FIA clarification before round 1 in Australia. And that's not panic. It sounds like confidence out of Ferrari right now, which isn't something we're always used to. McLaren are in the mix, but again, quiet. Pretty anonymous week, I would say. Strong mileage overall. Long run pace was slightly behind Ferrari with Lewis Hamilton on Friday, and calling themselves 4th fastest as well. Maybe honest, but nothing in their week screamed crisis or championship contender necessarily. Some quick touches along the rest of the grid. Big winner this week I felt was Williams. Lots and lots of mileage. They were tied for the most laps overall as a team. This is what they needed after Barcelona. Still a pace question with Williams. We don't know much about their overall pace, obviously, but putting laps on the board is exactly what was in store for them in week 1. Big loser has to be Aston Martin. The sentiment around Aston Martin continues to be extremely negative and extremely rough, especially around the Honda engine. All the reports are that it needed to be packaged extremely aggressively in order for it to fit with Adrian Newey's design philosophy, and that seems to be the tie-up right now with Honda and Aston Martin. Fernando Alonso also made comments on the regulations as a whole, that driver skill is dead under these new regulations. It's a serious statement from a 2-time world champion, and again, we'll kind of reference back to that later in the video too, that all these world champions talking about these regulations, it cannot be a good look for the FIA and Formula One. Haas would be the midfield leader for me, kind of by default. They just did the most mileage, or consistently across Barcelona and week 1 of Bahrain. They have been the most consistent of the midfield runners. Cadillac and Audi, still early days. Cadillac, some signs of life this week, but still not much going on there. I want to continue talking about this engine controversy as well. Like I said earlier, Ferrari has said they will not launch a formal protest, but they do want clarification before round 1 in Australia. It sounds like there's going to be conversations on this day 1 of Bahrain week 2, so tomorrow. Red Bull Powertrains continues to get praise, but scrutiny too. Let's look at the overall mileage for all manufacturers this past week in Bahrain. Mercedes engines have done massive mileage. Ferrari were solid. They did the most on average per team. Red Bull Powertrains mid-pack, but their average per team was pretty solid. Honda, very concerning, and Audi, it's still very early days to tell what's going on there with their engine package. And that leads me into one of the bigger talking points coming out of week one, and that was the start procedure and the safety concerns surrounding that. The fully charging these batteries in order to launch off the line, it takes about 6 to 20 seconds is what they're estimating. If nothing changes at this point, I don't really understand how pole position is going to get to the grid, sit there for a couple minutes waiting for P22 to get to the grid, and then if we go to lights out right away, how is anyone at the back of the grid going to have time to charge their battery in order to go through their full start procedure correctly? If it's going to continue like this, if this is actually how the starts are going to go for these new cars, there's going to need to be changes made on allowing the back of the grid X number of seconds to sit and charge their battery in order to then go through the full start procedure. It's come out this week, though, that Ferrari raised concerns about this last year to rival engine manufacturers, and they were dismissed. Now multiple teams are admitting this is a real safety concern. The practice start in Bahrain that they did was a total mess. Franco Colapinto, I referenced it in the intro, almost threw his car into the wall just trying to warm up his tires. And then after the start, when the lights went out, more than half the cars sitting there stalled on the grid, and there was almost cars running into the back of each other. It was a mess. So this has come up again recently, and Ferrari has now been the only team that has blocked any change to the start procedure. Call it petty, call it strategic, it's probably a bit of both, but clearly Fred Vasseur and Ferrari feel they're on top of this start procedure and don't want to give their opponents the out of changing the regulations. And all of this kind of culminates into more of a big picture conversation around these regulations and around what Formula One is going to look like this year and what it looks like so far. These regulations are already taking massive amounts of heat. What does the pinnacle of motorsport actually mean to us fans or to anyone, really? Is it the fastest machinery? Because we've had that in the past. Is it the best drivers in the world? Because the current 22 drivers that are on the grid, you can't say they're the best 22 in the world, I feel. Multiple world champions openly criticizing these regulations. Some of the people that are the most veteran on the grid and have driven the most, statistically the most successful driver of all time, and two drivers that are regarded as two of the biggest talents in the history of Formula One continue to talk down on these regulations and these cars. It's just not a good look. The PR is terrible right now for Formula One. And really, do we want to be debating battery percentage every lap? Because it seems like we're going to be. I mean, we'll see. And again, we talked about in a previous video the TV direction and the graphics system that they use to convey all this information. We still haven't seen any updates on that. How are they going to convey this all to us fans as we watch? I'm optimistic that engineering will continue to adapt and find ways of fixing these problems themselves, but that's the optimism we have right now. And on top of that, we still don't know who's fastest, and that's fun to talk about as well. It does seem like we're going to get the classic Big Four again, which I don't have any particular issue with that. I'd love to see a team like Williams, Aston Martin, whoever it might be, join that group. But it does seem like those four are going to be up there again this year. But it is fun to look at. We still don't have any clarity on who's going to be fastest, if anyone is necessarily going to have a step or be fastest. So we might get multiple competitive cars in the top four, and I think that would be phenomenal. But generally, the vibes heading into this season so far are pretty down across the board. And that's the real headline coming out of week one. Diving into week two and what we're looking forward to. Most notably, we're seeing headlines today of fuel suppliers. The only one that's been approved so far is Shell for the Ferrari-powered engines and BP for Audi. And it sounds like Petronas, Mercedes' fuel supplier, is allegedly in trouble to get approved in time for Australia. That's a risk for all four Mercedes-powered teams to be running temporary fuel at a performance loss in Australia. So that will be something to keep an eye on this week. It also sounds like there's going to be meetings tomorrow in regards to Mercedes' alleged engine advantage, as well as the race start procedure. So we'll have to keep an eye on news coming out on that on day one. And then generally, who actually is P4? Is it Red Bull? Is it McLaren, who both are claiming they're P4? Where do the rest of the top four slot in? Can Aston quiet the noise? FIA clarification on engine concerns, and then all of a sudden we're going to be a week out from Australia. I'm sorry. But that's going to be it for us today at Green Flag Racing. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe.